Why couldn't I get the warrant? 3 words, pal. Judge Abraham Schlichter. Clown loves criminals. Simple as that.
You tell him Wallace was suspected of killing a cop?
Of course I did. I got a lecture on the presumption of innocence.
Prosecutor's on her way to court now. Tell me what happened so I can tell her what she needs to get you your warrant.
Myers told his unit he was meeting Wallace at midnight. Residents heard gunshots at 12:07. Myers told his unit he was meeting Wallace behind the Serrano Brothers warehouse. Where was he killed? Behind the Serrano Brothers warehouse.
Those are guys from Myers' unit?
Narcotics Task Force, yeah.
You get affidavits from them?
I swore out the warrant on my own affidavit. With anyone but Schlichter, that would have been enough.
Annabeth. Okay, here's the deal. I'm gonna get affidavits from Myers' partners and fax them to you at the court.
I didn't do nothing! You get a bird for this! I didn't do nothing! Yeah, I ain't no cop killer.
You know him?
Brian Flynn, Myers' partner.
Coming to you live on the steps.
All right, 10 minutes. Let him know you care.
I do care, Pete.
Of course you do.
Mrs. Myers, James Conlon. I'm very sorry for your loss, ma'am.
Thank you.
Mr. Conlon, Chris Veeder. I was Jason's colleague and friend. My wife, Samantha.
Mr. Conlon, we all love Jason Myers so much. We're heartbroken.
I can assure you all my office will do everything it can to convict his killer.
We want you to know that we are supporting you in your upcoming campaign.
We?
The police and their families.
Well, thank you.
We need to talk.
After the briefing.
I look forward to seeing you at the Children's Hospital fundraiser.
Me too.
It's about the briefing. Detective Flynn. Ed Williams. We met at the scene.
Right.
I knew Jason Myers. He was a good guy.
Best partner I ever had. Or ever will. Listen, Williams, I was just on my way out.
Oh, no problem, no problem. You mind if I take a look at Myers' file on Wallace?
You know, you wouldn't believe the hell we get for sharing files. Better to go through channels. You should request them from the drug prosecutors in your office.
I'll do that. Just one question. Was it unusual for Myers to have a one-on-one meeting with Wallace?
Not really.
I'm just wondering why you weren't there.
The way we handle our informants is pretty complicated. I'd be happy to walk you through it when I have time.
You Ed?
Yeah.
Ed Williams, prosecutor's office. Chris Veeder. Nice to meet you. Come on in. You read the Bible?
Yeah, occasionally. I had one with pictures when I was a kid. Your guys don't much want to talk to me.
Sorry about that. You know how it can get. Cops and prosecutors. How can we help?
I'm just trying to make sense of this note we found in Myers' car. Do you know who this Kelly might be?
How's she pertinent?
Well, the note makes it look like Myers met her that night.
That'd mean he lied to us about what he was doing. It's pretty hard to imagine if he knew the man.
I did, and I agree with you. But we still have to consider the possibility she's a prostitute.
Myers and a hooker? That's even harder to imagine. Besides, it'd be stupid to lie about meeting an informant. All my guys log every meeting. I see the logs daily.
Myers was new to the unit. Maybe...
6 months. That's long enough to learn the system. Look, I understand you need to knock down the prostitute theory before the trial, but there's nothing to it. He went there to meet Wallace. All my guys will testify to that.
Wallace's attorney is saying your unit planted the .380 ammo in Wallace's house to frame him for Myers' murder.
Of course he is. But the place was crawling with police, reporters, you guys. It would have been impossible even if we'd wanted to, which we didn't. There's no need to frame the guy because he's guilty. I'm sorry, it's just that Jason was a great guy, a great cop. His widow's like a sister to me. I'd hate to see his reputation dragged through the mud by some lawyer.
Well, the sooner I find this Kelly, the sooner I can put the rumors to rest. Chris Veeder. You are under arrest for the murder of Jason Myers. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. You cannot afford one. One shall be appointed for you.
The weapon was found in a storm drain, a public place. What's the issue, Mr. Hellman?
Your Honor, my client believes that someone put his DNA on the gun. The gun was placed in the drain, and then they tipped off the prosecutor's office as to its location.
Was the search for the gun based on a tip, Ms. Chase?
Your Honor, I shouldn't have to answer that question. Confidential informants need to be able to provide evidence without having to disclose their identities.
Yes, but this informant has provided the only direct evidence connecting my client to the crime. The informant is, in effect, an accuser. Now, Mr. Veeder should be allowed to confront this accuser as he would any other.
Mr. Veeder's DNA on the gun speaks for itself, Your Honor.
Unless it was planted on the gun to frame him.
Did this confidential informant give you the location of the gun?
Yes, Your Honor.
You know this confidential informant's name.
Yes, Your Honor.
Then either he testifies or exclude the gun at trial.
Tell Flynn I'm looking forward to his testimony.
Good morning, Detective Flynn.
Good morning.
Can you please tell us about the night Jason Myers was murdered? It's all right. Take your time to recall the events of that night clearly. Did you see Detective Veeder that night?
He called me. He told me Jason was dead, that he'd been shot. Told me to meet him at the crime scene.
Detective Veeder told you he'd shot and killed Jason Myers.
And we both agreed to put the blame on Wallace.
Why did he trust you?
Because he knew something about me. He knew that I'd had an affair.
With Juliet Reynolds?
Yes.
How did you meet Juliet Reynolds?
Veeder introduced us. He needed to have something to hold over me.
He wanted you to drink the cup.
I betrayed my marriage. I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry.
Was there anything unusual about Juliet?
Yes. She is a transvestite.
A man.
Yes.
Order.
Mr. Flynn, I know it took a lot of courage for you to testify today. Thank you for your honesty.
Good afternoon, Detective Flynn. You didn't want your wife to find out about your relationship with Juliet Reynolds, did you?
No, of course not.
So when Miss Chase told you that either you testify that Detective Veeder killed Jason Myers or else was too much of a risk, and that is when you told her about the gun, isn't it?
Yes.
Didn't tell her about the gun until after the subject of Mr. Juliet Reynolds came up, did you?
Yeah, that's correct.
Did you put that gun in the storm drain?
No.
Did you transfer Detective Veeder's DNA onto that gun?
No.
Now, you were desperate not to testify, so you made up evidence to support the crime that the prosecution demanded that you prove. Is that not true, Detective Flynn?
No, that is not true.
We've heard drinking the cup is something of a motto for your unit. Is that true?
When Jesus' disciples say in that passage from Matthew that they are able to drink the cup, they submit themselves to something greater, to God. Now, some cops think this job is about power. For me, it's about humility.
Humility.
Submitting yourself to something greater. That's why I'm proud to be a cop.
Mr. Michaels testified that drinking the cup referred to your alleged efforts to lure and cajole him into bed with Kelly Lawson when she was 15 years of age. Is that true?
Absolutely not. I testified against Michaels at his trial for that crime.
What about Mr. Flynn? Did you lure and cajole him into a homosexual relationship with a transvestite?
I regret ever working with men like Flynn and Michaels. How could I or anyone make them do those things? That's not my place to judge, but I take responsibility for what I've done. And I can tell you, Jason Myers wasn't like them either. It would disgust him to see that people like that are used to accuse me. His death is a tragedy, not just for his family and our unit, but for this city that Jason gave his life to protect.
Detective Veeder, how long have you been a police officer?
22 years.
And in all your years of service, what awards have you received?
I've received the Medal of Honor, the Medal of Valor, and 3 mayor's commendations.
Have you ever been accused of a crime?
No, sir.
Have you ever been charged with misconduct of any sort?
No, sir.
How many times have you testified in court?
I've testified at approximately 150 trials.
And in all those hundreds of hours of testimony, have you ever been accused of perjury?
No.
Detective Veeder, did you kill Jason Myers?
No.
Detective Flynn testified, quote, Veeder told Jason, she's my whore. Who are you to turn her down when I give her to you? In what sense was Kelly Lawson your whore?
I never said that.
You pimped her to 2 men in your unit.
Objection!
Ask a question, Miss Chase, and move on.
You manipulated Kelly Lawson just like you manipulated the men who work for you, didn't you, Detective? They're all your whores, aren't they?
Objection, Your Honor.
A question, Miss Chase?
The question, Detective, is do you manipulate the men in your unit to ensure their loyalty?
I trust them with my life.
Answer the question, do you manipulate the men in your unit?
No. Flynn lied about me because you cornered him with some cheap secret. You destroyed him right in front of us. I'm not the manipulator, Miss Chase.
On the 1 count of murder, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty.
Doug, Mr. Veeder.
Miss Chase, I was just taking stock of the shambles you've made of my life.
The shambles I've made of your life, Mr. Veeder.
Suspended without pay, under departmental investigation, the men in my unit on desk duty, internal affairs turning their lives upside down.
What are you complaining about? You were acquitted.
That trial ruined my reputation.
Mr. Veeder's planning on suing you and the city for damages, wrongful prosecution.
Good luck with that. A warrant for your DNA.
I know what it is.
This concerning the Kelly Lawson matter?
Exactly.
What makes you think my client is involved?
Oh, we're trying to rule him out as a suspect.
Right. Well, Counselor, looks like you're back on the clock.
Wonderful.
Swab him.
Hang on, here they come.
Feels good to do something normal for a change.
Yeah,
These past couple of days, it's awful about Kelly.
I know. Breaks my heart.
I should have talked her out of running away. I knew it was a mistake.
Don't blame yourself, Grace. She just made a bad choice.
You really don't think Pretty Boy could have killed her?
Not the type. He's into toys, massage oil, fun stuff.
I have a bad feeling about him.
Well, look, she never even made it to his place. I checked. Whoever killed her had to be a real perv, you know? Rough sex.
Kelly said sometimes Pretty Boy would tie her up.
Did he ever choke her?
Is that what happened?
Creep strangled her with her own bra. Trust me, it wasn't him. Pretty Boy had nothing to do with this.
He just gave her inside information on the murder.
They're getting in his car. We're on the move. We're headed back to Grace's apartment.
Thanks for dinner. I feel much better.
Anytime. If you need something, come to me. And the next time you start thinking about Kelly, do me a favor. I want you to say a prayer for her. Pray that she's at peace.
Ray, do you have a visual? What's going on?
Damn it. He's got his hands all over her.
You'll find the wire.
Take care of yourself, okay?
Okay. I'll sleep much better tonight. Thank you, Mr. Veeder.
Good night.
He's inside. He's leaving.
Thank God.
As soon as he's gone, we'll move it to the safe house.
Okay.
What a waste of my time.
Detective, once again, you have the right to remain silent.
You know the rest. Maybe you're a little rusty for not reading dealers their rights when you rip them off.
Look at you two. How's it feel to be arresting a real cop? You get off on that?
You have no idea.
Annabeth, can you spell vendetta? It's 2 T's like acquittal.
Not this time. We have Mr. Veeder disclosing details of the murder. Confidential information that was not disclosed to the public.
Disclosing what and to whom?
We're not in the discovery phase yet, Doug.
Well, this is a fishbowl environment, and my client could have picked up the details of this case from any number of sources, another detective, crime technician.
The coroner's verdict was sealed.
Oh, that office leaks like a sieve. More important question is, what were the results of the DNA test on my client, and was there any match to evidence that you picked up at the crime scene?
We're no longer in possession of that evidence.
Really? Why not?
He arranged for it to disappear.
You overestimate my power and influence.
Do I?
Well, if you don't have any evidence, you might want to consider dropping the charges.
That's not going to happen.
You're so obsessed with me that you're not even looking for the real killer.
I'm looking right at him.
When was the last time you spoke with your friend, Kelly Lawson?
The day after Detective Myers was killed, she called me. She said she was scared and she had to leave town.
Did she say why she was leaving town?
She said that Mr. Veeder had shot another policeman.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained. Jury will disregard any reference to prior events, and I will sanction counsel if either side tries to introduce these events into this proceeding.
What else did Kelly tell you, Grace?
She said she was going to go meet a guy named Pretty Boy about some money to help her leave town.
What was Pretty Boy's real name?
I don't know. He's married.
What was the nature of Kelly's relationship with Pretty Boy?
Kelly used to party with him as a favor for Mr. Veeder.
Would you please tell the court what you mean by partied?
They had sex.
After Kelly's body was found, did you have a conversation with Detective Veeder about her murder?
He said that Pretty Boy had nothing to do with it. That she was killed by some creep who strangled her with her own bra.
The same information the coroner testified was confidential. No further questions.
Miss Hendricks, these parties that Chris Veeder supposedly threw for his friends, how did that work?
Mr. Veeder had a go-between. Somebody who would call Kelly and give her the address and time, and she told us.
Who was this go-between?
I don't know.
So there's no way to corroborate your story then, is there?
No.
One last question. When you told Mr. Veeder that you couldn't stop thinking about Kelly, what did he say to you?
He told me to pray for her.
Vita, the shelter renovation, you picked out those tiles yourself, didn't you?
Yes, I went to several stores and obtained samples.
Samples matching the invoices that the prosecution submitted as evidence.
Correct.
And these particular tiles were found in the steamer trunk with Kelly Lawson's body.
I have no knowledge of how that happened.
What did you do with these tiles?
I put them in a box and I left it in the garage of the shelter.
And what happened to them?
They went missing. I assume some worker walked off with them.
As is so often the case. One last question. Your office laptop, is it accessible?
I don't lock the door to my office during the day, if that's what you mean.
So someone could have come in and used it to check out the conditions at Red Hawk Lake?
Easily. Any number of people.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Mrs. Veeder, you didn't notice that these tile samples were missing until after your husband had been arrested and your records were seized. Isn't that correct?
Objection. Argumentative.
Sustained.
Mrs. Veeder, will you please tell the court what you know about your husband's relationship with Kelly Lawson?
He mentored her, as he did so many of the girls at the shelter.
You were, in fact, the go-between, weren't you, Mrs. Veeder?
Excuse me?
Between your husband and Kelly Lawson. For the sex ring that Grace Hendricks testified he was running out of your shelter.
That girl lied. There is no such thing, there never was. You made it up to destroy his reputation.
Phone records indicate that your husband called you several times a day.
What's wrong with that? Doesn't your wife call you Mr. Conlon?
I'm divorced.
I'm not surprised.
It's the pattern of these calls that's interesting, Mrs. Veeder. An incoming call from your husband, followed immediately by an outgoing call from your phone to an untraceable number. Why the secrecy?
The business of the shelter is confidential.
Were some of these untraceable calls made to Kelly Lawson, ma'am?
No.
To the other girls from the shelter that your husband used to serve as his friends?
Objection.
Sustained.
The girls ostensibly under your care, Mrs. Veeder?
Objection, Your Honor. Objection!
Nothing further. Kelly Lawson was a troubled young girl who ran away from home looking for a better life. She thought she found that life at the Greenwood Youth Shelter. But what she found was Chris Veeder. He abused her trust. He exploited her innocence. And when she tried to escape, he lured her to Red Hawk Lake in the middle of the night. He strangled her. He threw her body in a trunk and dumped it in the lake. Detective Veeder was arrogant enough to believe that he would get away with her murder because he believed that Kelly Lawson's life was insignificant. That she was a throwaway girl, a girl no one would miss. Chris Veeder must be held accountable. Find him guilty for the murder of Kelly Lawson.
There is no forensic evidence whatsoever that ties Chris Veeder to the murder of this poor girl. Now, why does the prosecution believe that he killed her? Because they never looked for any other suspects. Kelly Lawson was a runaway, easy prey for a predator. The prosecution didn't bother to look for the real killer because from the minute that Kelly Lawson's body was found, they focused all of their efforts and all of their energies onto my client. Prosecution has a grudge against Chris Veeder, and that is why they mounted this case against him with no proof. Now see this for what it is, a vendetta.
Careful, Mr. Hellman. You're treading very close to the line.
Fine, Your Honor. Consider the evidence. Find Mr. Veeder innocent. Thank you.
In the matter of the state of Indiana versus Christopher Veeder, the jury finds the defendant guilty of murder.
You better not be wasting my time, Mr. Veeder.
Wouldn't dream of it.
All right, just give me a name. I'll talk to Conlon about a sentencing recommendation.
Peter Durkin.
Durkin is pretty boy.
Kelly didn't know his real identity till she saw him on the news at that press conference Conlon gave after Myers was killed.
You mean after you shot him?
Durkin was standing right next to Conlon at that news conference.
Go on.
She tried to blackmail him. He had to shut her up. He told her he'd hide her on his boat for the night, and he called me and asked me to get rid of her.
Which you did.
Oh, I made him stick around and lend a hand. Why should I do the dirty work all by myself?
Durkin's dead, along with one of my colleagues and 2 other people. Trust me, I'm not in the mood to fool around.
We were prepared to honor the plea agreement, Annabeth, but it's our position that the people should do the same.
Mr. Veeder's testimony is no longer required. Our sentencing recommendation will be life without parole.
It was your responsibility to get him to trial in one piece.
We couldn't have foreseen this.
You couldn't find your forehead with a map and a flashlight. The guy was connected all the way up, City Hall and beyond. Anyone could have foreseen this.
Shut up, Chris. If Mr. Veeder tells you everything he knows about Peter Durkin, his associates, his activities,
I would be willing to listen.
same plea deal.
Same. 30 years for Kelly Lawson's murder.
I tell you about Pete, and that's it.
You also tell me about your criminal activities. The money laundering, the prostitution, the robbery, the drug trafficking. Full disclosure. We want to know everything. Every politician who was involved, every businessman, every cop.
You sure you want to know everything?
You'll need immunity from additional charges.
Done.
What about my wife?
Are you admitting she's involved through the shelter in prostitution and money laundering?
I'm not saying anything like that. I'm just saying I want her protected.
I'm not going to promise you I won't prosecute third parties who've been involved in your criminal enterprises. That includes the guys in your unit and your wife.
Guard! Then I can't tell you what I know.
Chris.
Chris! Thomas was a go-between. Through him, Boudreaux would tip me off about rival dealers. I'd bust them, rip them off.
Keep the money and sell the drugs back to Boudreaux.
I'd give him a good price. It worked out well for everyone.
Why would Boudreaux want Durkin dead?
He wouldn't.
We know Thomas was the shooter. Forensics puts him at the scene.
No doubt. And no doubt Boudreaux hired him, but Benny's just a broker, an intermediary. He farmed it out to his guy, Thomas. Benny doesn't do his own wet work anymore.
Who hired him?
Who knows? A lot of people sleeping easier now that Durkin's out of the picture.
You'll testify against Boudreaux in the narcotics charges.
That's part of the deal, isn't it?
We also get sent.
With Deshays.
You didn't know?
I'm rotting away in here, and she's...
Yeah, she is.
Turns my stomach. She betrayed me.
Now's your chance to return the favor.
So, Chris?
Durkin used funds from his clients' campaigns to bribe politicians.
To get them to do what?
Pass legislation. We planned on using the state's power of eminent domain to obtain privately owned land for development.
So the new children's hospital your wife's been fundraising for.
Who could be against a new children's hospital?
I assume there was money to be made.
Millions.
What do you want to do, Annabeth?
I want to put you on our witness list to testify against your wife.
I'm counting the hours.
And your wife knew about the scheme to appropriate property for construction of a new children's hospital through eminent domain?
It was her plan.
Who would have benefited financially?
The shareholders. Mr. Durkin, Mr. Deshays, my wife.
Did you speak to your wife after Mr. Durkin's arrest?
She was quite upset. She said she knew that he'd tell the authorities about her hospital scheme in exchange for a more lenient sentence.
What was your response?
I agreed with her. I suggested she collect her assets and leave the country, but she said she couldn't do that. I later found out why.
Did she say what she was going to do?
She said that she would take care of it, and that Mr. Deshays would help her.
What did you take that to mean?
Objection. Calls for speculation.
Your Honor, I'm asking the witness's opinion based on personal knowledge of his wife.
I'll allow it.
I took it to mean that they would have Mr. Durkin killed. Problem solved.
A vengeful husband who learns his wife is having an affair while he's in prison for murdering a young woman concocts a story of murder for hire.
I'm sorry, what's the question?
The question is, Mr. Veeder, aren't you lying to get back at your wife?
I'm telling the truth. It's part of my deal.
Excuse me?
Self-interest, counselor. I get years taken off of my sentence if I tell the truth. If I lie, life in prison. So, I have every reason to tell the truth. Sorry, darling.
You son of a bitch.
Mrs. Veeder.
Nothing further.